So, good afternoon, everybody. Actually, thanks for joining for the talk. So, my name is Anand Prasad. I'm first year PhD in cognitive science from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. So, my talk is based on the nature of subjectivity and the time through the lens of MPE and how some of the common properties of MPE can give explanation for some of the phenomena that we experience in our normal experience other than MPE. So, so just to give a quick recap, that Mitsinger has pointed out that there are many common denominators for the MPE, out of which my focus will be on the last two aspects, that is the no self and atemporal aspect. So I think the simplest distinction into going into the nature of self is to get into the classification given by Sean Gallagher, that is the narrative self as well as the immediate self. As you know, the narrative self is more about the timeline of events that happen, and through the memories, the agent that you pull out of the memories, that is the narrative self. That will not be our interest in our this talk, and the current focus will be on the immediate self, which can be categorized that if you take a snapshot of a now or a present moment, there is a subject which is actually experiencing this, or an observer which actually observes what is all happening. So that aspect is also is called as immediate self, or it is also called as phenomenal self in many other terms. So I would like to dissect this immediate self a little bit more into understanding the nature of subjectivity. So first aspect of immediate self, I would like to say is that the self luminosity. Some people always call it as pre-reflective self-awareness. I would like to call it as self luminosity. The first term of self luminosity is coming from the meditative traditions. One is from Buddhism, which uses the term of sosamvedana, or from the Advaita traditions, that is the another traditions which call it as sopragasha. So what is exactly is that whenever an event happens, whenever a conscious event happen, there is also intentionality, that is awareness of something happening, plus there is an immediate feature of that it is aware of itself without any reflection, introspection, or kind of any self identification, without any temporal gap in between them. There is a identification to itself which is happening with the episode of experiencing. So in cognitive science, I guess there is different types of theories which try to account for this. Not the exact explanation. One of these will be metacognition, which is the reflect one's own thinking or representation of the mental state itself. In experiments, we used to ask like how confident you are about your own response. Those type of things are coming under metacognition. Or there are higher order theories which says that there will be a first order state and there will be a second order thought into the first order state, so that it explains how you are conscious about the objects, but this is pretty much silent about how you are conscious about yourself. That aspect is pretty much missing in this. So the Peter has pretty much put this in a better way. Says that these theories actually is talking about the more kind of a representational reflexivity, where there are thoughts, concepts, or autonomic consciousness where you consciously think or simulate yourself into the future or simulate yourself into the past and to identify yourself. But actually, self luminosity or pre-reflective self awareness actually slips through all of this. And I feel like this requires much more deeper analysis into what is actually self luminosity. I think it got freezed.
Yeah, you have to use this.
Thank you. Thank you. So next as aspect of the immediate self, I would like to call is constructed properties of self. which includes three aspects. First one is sense of ownership. Second one is the embodiment, feeling of embodiment, and the third one is the first person perspective. Sense of ownership is that there is a tendency for in any conscious event to attribute the contents of perception to itself. There is an identification to the contents of perception. For example, body is a content of perception which we try to attribute to ourselves. There is a tendency of mindness that is always happening, but I would like to say that this is quite shaky. For example, alien hand syndrome or phantom limb, where people says that this hand is not mine, or some external particular objects outside the sphere of the body is taken into ownership. So these are more kind of constructed properties which can differ accordingly according to different situations. Second aspect is the embodiment. Embodiment is the feeling of me residing inside the framework of the body and experiencing the world outside. This is also quite shaky if you look into phenomena like out of body experience or near death experience, where people could see their body itself from a perspective from outside, actually. So even the first person perspective, the third aspect of the constructed properties itself is also shaky when it comes in when we talk about near death experiences. So coming into NPE, so when the notion of self disappears, I would like to say that what vanishes are the constructed properties of self, but not the self luminosity per se. So even though these three constructed properties, for example, even the sense of ownership goes away, self localization goes away, perspectival goes away, but the self luminosity, like, is this happening to me? That aspect is not at all getting affected, and it is always present irrespective of these three aspects. So I feel like that is not a necessary criteria. The self luminosity to exist, all other properties are not a necessary criteria to exist. So um, the only, even though people talk about there is no content, one of the minimal content we can rely from the MPE is the pure awareness knows itself. That is, I would like to call the self luminosity itself. That is the only thing people are able to talk about when they come from the experience. So there are different ways of looking at the self luminosity. For example, phenomenal signature of self knowing, awareness knowing itself, consciousness cognizing itself. There are different versions of it. But I would like to say that there is a difference between self and subjectivity. Self refers to more kind of a psychophysical entity, which refers to different aspects, which includes the constructed properties. But subjectivity is an immediate aspect which doesn't need to be dependent on any of the things. So from this reports, we could say that subjectivity is not tied to any thoughts, memories, body image, or a self-referential constructs, or any narrative or a personal identity. But then who is the subject? That question is very important. But who is the subject requires some kind of a conceptualization which requires more thought or more content of perception. So without that, I would like to say that subjectivity can exist without any of this thing to rely on it. So a better way to look at this, based on a hierarchy of self, unfolding the hierarchy of self, where this is not a new idea. For example, if you go to Upanishads or Yoga Sutras, they already have a hierarchical model of the being per se. First is the physical, where there is the emotion of body and all those sorts of things. Second is the mental aspects of mental events happening, and then third is the ego, the I-ness, and the last is the blissful states, that is the MP and stuff like that. So I would like to put the self luminosity or the self luminous awareness or awareness of itself is the ground of all the episodes. Even the now, even every episode of our experience, not at all in the isolated MP. In every episode of experience, we have the self luminous ground, which is at the at the ground, and all other properties, the ownership, embodiment, all the properties are tied on top of it like an onion, which can be stripped away through the meditation or MPE. See, also one of the important aspect is that MPE should be is coming more from the meditative tradition. But in the meditative tradition itself, there is a difference of opinion. For example, in Buddhism, says that there is no self. But if you are identified with the first three aspects of the hierarchy, that is the physical, mind, and ego, then this disappears. You report that yourself disappears. But when you go to Advaita or other Indian other traditions of meditation, people say the self luminous ground is itself the true self. That is, realization of self itself is happening at the lower level. So if you are not identified with the three layers, then if that disappears, the self doesn't disappear. So the main attribution of self is the important thing. If you're attributed to different layers, that layer disappears, the self disappears. But if you are attribute yourself to the ground state, if everything disappears, the self will not disappear actually. Next is about the time aspect. So when a report says that this is timeless, we have to say about the temporal properties. What are the properties which, when vanishes, people could experience timelessness? First is order or succession, like one after the other. Since there is no contents out there, so there is no change, so there is no order or succession. Next is there is unbounded in time. There is no beginning or end. Meditators report that they are not aware that when this begins or when this ends. So that is unbounded in time. And also, they report that there is no temporal structure. There is no past, present, or future. That is also one of the key property that there. And also, there is no awareness of duration. So, how long? There is always a distortion of duration happens when they come out of meditation. And there is no anticipation actually of what it is going to be in future. So these are more kind of a temporal properties. When this vanishes, might be people can have a conclusion retrospectively that it is timelessness. Now, a recent study, a recent paper by Akiko argues that in MPE, even though all the properties goes away, there can be one of the properties which can remain, that is called as duration. So you could see that I would like to highlight the fifth property that is written. It is indeterminate duration, that something has passed, and versus determinate duration, that is how long something has passed. These are two things she tries to distinguish. So she tries to say that the indeterminate duration is a necessary for all the temporal properties to exist. Actually, some time has to pass for any of the things to happen, like order, succession, change, anything to happen. We need to have some passage of time. So that should be a category, or that should be a temporal property that still exists in the MPE. It is more kind of an account by Windit. So if there is no change out there, if there is nothing changing, how can we account for duration? That is the important question should be asked. So she comes with some notion that mental agency or maintaining alertness during meditation itself can be enough to give an awareness of the duration. That is the account, that even though there is no change in content level, but your ability to maintain attention to any kind of one pointed object or kind of anything stable itself, the effort itself can be give an indication for the awareness of duration. But I would like to say that there is a confusion actually happening here. The MPE itself and the transition to MPE itself has to be distinguished actually. Transition to MPE is the state where we have to put effort actually to maintain our attention. For example, people in meditation, we have to put constant effort into maintaining our alertness into one of the objects. For example, breath. So this maintaining alertness might be in the transition states of MPE, where MPE itself can be a full absorption episode where you are effortlessly going into like a deep ocean where you are aware of itself. That is the only information available. So maintaining alertness more kind of direct will not actually point towards the MPEs, the state. Maybe it might be the transition to MPE. Now, I would like to pick one simple model, that is the simple model to explain the perception of time, actually. So, in time perception literature, where there is a very old model which is called as internal clock model, which actually explains how we experience the subjective duration. So, this is a theoretical model which says that there is a subjective internal clock which ticks when you pay attention to time, and it accumulates some pulses into an accumulator, and whatever you report as how much time has passed is the number of pulses that is there in the accumulator. And so attention here is a gate. If you pay attention to time, then only pulses started to fall into accumulator, and then you can report the how much duration has passed. And this model can this actually used to predict the why we experience boredom, or why we in flow state, why we experience there is no sense of time. For example, in flow state we actually don't pay attention to time, so the gate closes, there is no accumulation of pulses, so when the pulses are less, there is no time to be actually experienced. Or in terms of boredom, you pay always attention to time, so more pulses are accumulated, and when then you say that more time has passed, or time seems to subjective time has expanded. But in the case of MPE, the attention is not directed towards the time aspect. So time itself cannot, you cannot pay attention to time in MPE, because in the I'm not sure about whether you can pay attention, because paying attention requires so many options, where you can have an agency to control attention to one aspect from the other aspect, where more report says that attention is not at all there. More kind of awareness of itself is the only information that you are aware of. So if you are not paying to attention to time, duration can be a very wrong candidate to propose. Now, I would like to say about when we require a temporal framework and when we don't require a temporal framework. So there are two kinds of things that is has to be distinguished. One is awareness of transient content versus awareness of pure awareness. So generally, the contents that are coming into our experiences are transient in nature, which means that it happens over time, and there is a beginning and end to it. So those type of contents actually follows a temporal structure, for example past, present and future, because contents keeps unfolding in time. There is a beginning and there is an end, there is appearing, there is a disappearing. So we need to actually have a temporal framework for those type of transient contents. But in case of pure awareness, actually awareness is always available in the present moment. There is no a temporal framework actually required, because if something is absent in awareness, then we require memory or retention to report it. But if something is always present in awareness, self luminosity is always available when you have every time you experience, then I don't think we require a temporal framework like past, present, future, because something is absent only we require retention or a memory to pull out something. So here I would like to say that a temporal framework is necessary for transience or transient nature of contents. For other things, we don't have to rely on them to depend on it. So, as I mentioned, the self luminosity aspect is never absent actually. In every moment, it is actually available without a break. So, we don't require retention as an element to account for the self luminosity. And also, it is always available. So, for example, Husserl's time consciousness, the retention, primal impression, or protension is actually required to explain the continuity in time because of the transience of the contents. But for the self luminosity, it is always available, which doesn't require this framework. So, I would like to postulate that there is ever present or continuity can itself be treated as a temporal property. For example, if self luminosity is always available at every moment of our experience, it can be treated as an ever present reality or something always existing. So that can be itself treated as a temporal property. Now, I would like to say that what are the implications of proposing something as always existing or kind of continuously existing? We can account for some kind of a common phenomena that everybody goes through, that is the continuity of experience. Generally, we experience that our experience is so continuous, like one after the other. We doesn't feel any discreteness, but still we have a debate in whether the conscious perception is discrete or continuous. Some people say that even the conscious perception is happening in frames, like in movies, and continuity can be an illusion. For example, one of the candidates people proposes is that each frame length can be 30 to 50 millisecond. That actually is been empirically coming from the simultaneity judgment paradigm. That is the one of the candidate. And Herzog also proposes something like discreteness, in that we are not aware of at every moment in time. There is a 400 millisecond of unconscious period, and then where we have actually the conscious perception. So quickly, I will say that if we have a continuous state of consciousness that is always available, then actually we can actually say how why we have continuous experience, even there is a discreteness in contents. For example, quickly, if in the meditation you know that the rate of contents becomes so less, so there is a thought coming, then the thought goes away, then what remains is the self luminous ground actually, and then the other thoughts come. So even in the discrete nature is still there, but the self luminous ground protects it from having a continuity across time actually. So there is other implications like passage of time and also persistence of subject. If we feel that we are having remaining same in the all the time, because even the contents are changing, the presence in which the contents are changing never changes. So which gives us a notion that there is a persistence of subject. And lastly, Barry Dayton has pointed out that there is a phenomenon of co-consciousness. That is, we tend to have simultaneous experiences together. When I'm talking to, I am aware of my thoughts, but I can see things. So there is a simultaneity awareness of many things that are coming. So it must be broadcasted into something like an underground or a ground awareness. So a self luminosity can be postulated as an underlying ground in which all the phenomena are happening, which could be a possibility that we can have a simultaneous awareness of many things actually. So thank you so much for that.